Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're unpacking one of the most high-stakes, absolutely complex, and closely watched geopolitical realities on the planet right now, and that's the China-Taiwan conflict. If you've been paying any attention to the news lately, you already know this isn't just some localized regional dispute. No, this is a situation that has the very real potential to completely reshape the global order. We're going to break down exactly how we got here, what the current realities are, and why this matters so much to your everyday life. We have a ton of fascinating ground to cover in today's explainer, so let's jump right in.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for this explainer. We'll start with number 1, the core dispute. 2, a divided history. 3, the global stakes. 4, flashpoints in escalation. And finally, 5, the risk of conflict.
Section 1, the core dispute, a question of sovereignty. Okay, let's dive into this. At the very center of this massive geopolitical puzzle is one seemingly simple yet incredibly loaded question. Is Taiwan an independent country, or is it a part of China? Literally every single diplomatic dance, every military maneuver across the Taiwan Strait, it all traces back to how the different parties answer that exact question. And this perfectly illustrates the total divide in perspectives. So China's official position views Taiwan as a breakaway province. To the government in Beijing, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and they maintain that eventual reunification simply must happen. They've even stated they'll use force to achieve it if it becomes absolutely necessary. In stark contrast, Taiwan's position is that it is a self-governing democracy. It has its own freely elected government, its own military, a thriving, totally independent economy, and a really distinct identity. This fundamental, unresolved disagreement over sovereignty is basically the engine driving the entire conflict.
Section 2, a divided history, origins of the conflict.
To understand this, we have to rewind a bit. It all really starts after the fall of China's last imperial dynasty in 1912, which is when the Republic of China was established. But, this period was highly unstable, and it led to a massive civil war in the 1920s between two main factions, the Chinese nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the Chinese communists, led by Mao Zedong. They did briefly pause their fighting to unite against the Japanese invasion during World War II, but as soon as that global war ended, the civil war picked right back up. The real pivotal split happened in 1949. Mao Zedong's Communist Party won control of the mainland, establishing the People's Republic of China in Beijing. Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government retreated across the strait to the island of Taiwan. From 1949 onward, these two sides literally went down completely different paths. Mainland China developed under a communist system with strict one-party rule. Taiwan, functioning totally on its own, built its own separate government, its own military, and an independent economy. And over the decades, Taiwan eventually transitioned into a vibrant, multi-party democracy. Because of this decades-long separation in how people lived, worked, and governed themselves, a highly distinct Taiwanese identity developed on the island.
Section 3, the global stakes, why Taiwan matters.
Now, you might be wondering, why should the rest of the world care so much? Well, the answer largely comes down to technology. Specifically, this one company, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC for short. It might actually shock you to learn that Taiwan holds what is essentially a near monopoly on the production of the world's most advanced computer chips. We're talking about them creating over 90% of the highest-end chips on Earth. Consider the tech sitting in your own home right now. These tiny little pieces of silicon produced in Taiwan are the lifeblood of our modern world. They power the smartphone you look at every day, the artificial intelligence that's shaping our future, global military defense systems, even the cars we drive. If a conflict were to break out and disrupt Taiwan's semiconductor industry, it wouldn't just be a political crisis. It would instantly trigger a massive, completely unprecedented disruption of the entire global economy. Literally everything with an on switch would be impacted.
But beyond the tech, there's also the sheer physical geography of it all. Taiwan sits in an incredibly critical position out in the Pacific. For China, controlling Taiwan is seen as strategically vital for its national security, and it's deeply tied to their historical sense of national unity. For the United States, keeping Taiwan secure is viewed as essential for maintaining regional stability, and it acts as a key geographic limit on Chinese military expansion in Asia. So it's a classic geopolitical choke point where two massive superpowers have entirely overlapping interests.
Section 4, flashpoints and escalation, a delicate balance. First off, we have to understand the One China policy, which is arguably the biggest political hurdle here. China's position is absolute. There is only one China, Taiwan is a part of it, and no other country is allowed to officially recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. But Taiwan's position isn't a monolith at all. The Taiwanese public is actually quite divided on this. Some citizens strongly advocate for formal independence. Many others prefer to just maintain the current, somewhat ambiguous status quo, and some even favor closer economic and cultural ties with the mainland. Into this really complex mix steps the United States, whose role requires a very, very careful balancing act. Back in 1979, the U.S. officially recognized the People's Republic of China in Beijing, which meant cutting formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. However, the U.S. continued to support Taiwan unofficially. Crucially, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act. This is a law that legally allows America to sell defensive weapons to Taiwan, ensuring the island can protect itself.
And that brings us to a crucial concept: strategic ambiguity. This is the U.S. policy of intentionally not clearly stating whether it would send American troops to directly fight China if Taiwan were attacked. The logic here is honestly brilliant in its complexity. By being vague, the U.S. hopes to deter China from invading because Beijing doesn't know for sure if America will fight, while simultaneously deterring Taiwan from declaring formal independence because Taipei doesn't know for sure if America will actually back them up. It's a very intentional gray area designed specifically to keep the peace. But as you can imagine, that peace is regularly tested. A major, super high-stakes turning point happened recently in 2022 when then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Beijing viewed this high-level visit as a severe violation of their agreements. China reacted furiously, immediately launching massive, unprecedented military exercises. They were firing missiles right around the island and simulating full naval blockades. It was a stark, terrifying reminder of just how fast this situation can heat up. And that brings us to the present day in 2026, where the escalation just continues to accelerate. China is fully maintaining its pressure campaign, conducting large-scale military exercises, making frequent air incursions right into Taiwan's defense zone, and actively pushing to isolate Taiwan internationally. In response, Taiwan is rapidly hardening its own defenses. They are dramatically increasing their defense spending, purchasing highly advanced weapons from the U.S., and expanding their military reserves. They want peace, absolutely, but they are preparing for the worst.
Section 5. The risk of conflict. Global consequences.
Experts are constantly monitoring a few nightmare scenarios that could act as immediate triggers for a war. An official declaration of independence by Taiwan would almost certainly trigger a military response from Beijing. Alternatively, China could decide to enforce a total economic blockade on the island. But perhaps the most terrifying risk of all is just a simple mistake. Think about it, an accidental clash between a Chinese and a U.S. warship or fighter jet, operating in this heavily militarized strait that just spirals completely out of control. If any of those triggers are actually pulled, the fallout would be catastrophic, and it would spread far beyond the borders of Asia. Economically, like we discussed, we'd see immediate global chip shortages, plunging stock markets, and a total collapse of major global trade routes. Militarily, this would absolutely not stay a localized fight. It would likely draw on the United States, Japan, and other regional allies. Analysts pretty much universally agree this would become the largest, most devastating military conflict in Asia since the end of World War II. Now, given these terrifying stakes, it totally makes sense when you look at public opinion data from the island itself. The vast majority of Taiwanese citizens pragmatically prefer to just maintain the current status quo. They want to avoid immediate unification with China, but they also want to avoid any formal declaration of independence that would guarantee a war. They really just want to continue living their lives in peace. However, that desire for the status quo crashes directly into the firm stated goals of Beijing. Just look at this quote from Chinese President Xi Jinping. He has stated repeatedly and very clearly that reunification with Taiwan is, quote, inevitable. While Beijing says it prefers peaceful reunification, they have purposefully never taken the option of military force off the table. So when you strip it all down, why does this matter globally? Because this conflict is no longer just a territorial dispute over an island. It has evolved into a massive proxy for the most critical issues of our time. It's a symbol of the debate between democracy and authoritarianism. It's the literal geographic frontline of the broader US-China superpower rivalry. It is the absolute choke point for the world's most critical technology supply chains, and ultimately it's going to determine the future balance of power in Asia. I want to leave you with this really powerful summary quote from the source material we've been analyzing today. The conflict between China and Taiwan is not simply a dispute over an island. It is a struggle shaped by civil war,
identity, global power, technology, and nationalism. And as tensions rise across the Taiwan Strait, the world watches closely because the future of Asia and perhaps the global economy itself may depend on what happens next. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If the silicon ships that literally power your entire life stopped crossing that 100-mile stretch of water tomorrow, how long would it take for your world to just grind to a halt? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.